Hello collectors, and welcome to my review of the NECA Godzilla 2014 6-inch tall, 12-inch head-to-tail action figure. This is NECA's first crack at the King of the Monsters, and many are wondering how it is. So let's take a look and see whether or not it's worth adding into your collection. One of the best aspects of this figure is the fact NECA had access to the digital files used to make Godzilla in the actual 2014 movie, and this is reflected in the sculpt. However, there are a few points, or lack thereof as I'll explain later, which I feel need to be brought up. Overall though, the sculpt on the figure is really great. Using a mixture of the CGI model, in addition to hand sculpting certain parts, and an approval process spanning 3 or 4 attempts to get this approved, according to Randy from NECA, results in a figure that, for the price point, is really nice in the detail department. The head, as you can see, is sculpted really well, including the very tiny teeth. You can even make out the nostrils and whatnot on him. However, I feel this is the weakest part of the figure in terms of paint. The teeth aren't totally painted on mine and on others too, and as you can almost see on this side right here, the camera's not necessarily picking it up too well. The inner paint for the mouth spills over just a tad. In addition to this, I feel that the eyes, as you can see here, the eyes are perhaps a smidge too big, and the pupil placement reminds me a bit of a T-Rex. If you remember a certain scene in the movie towards the end involving a building and Ford, you'll know this Godzilla has the ability to look forward instead of constantly to the sides, as shown here on the NECA, so I find the placement a bit odd. However, that's all I can really complain about when it comes to paint. Looking at the chest of Godzilla, you can see some fantastic markings from the sculpt highlighted by a brown-green paint mix, which really brings out the bumps and ridges. Looking at the neck and the upper torso of Godzilla, the sculpting is really well done, and his scales, plates, what have you, they look fantastic, and they are highlighted with a subtle blue dry brushing, which really pops under certain lighting. Since I mentioned the blue paint, do take note that there was some sort of mix-up with this Godzilla in the figure to some degree in the painting process. See, this figure is supposed to have blue highlights, though there are some which lack these highlights. If this does matter to you, be sure to ask a retailer or thoroughly examine him before you make a purchase. A quick shot of his thigh here, also showing those fantastic blue highlights. And a quick shot of those feet, since everybody loves this Godzilla's feet. The dorsal plates are a little disappointing, as the tips are for the most part rounded, and they're made of a softer plastic, so there may be warping if you press him up against something, or he has to go in storage, or even if he's in the clamshell wrong. Finally, the tail part here. It's made of a plastic that is for the most part hard, but when you get down to here, the part where you need to attach it from the clamshell, that needs to house the bendy wire, so it's kind of rubbery. So just be careful of that it might break. And for those of you who may or may not be wondering, here is the underside of the tail. So, all in all, Godzilla looks mostly great, with a few flaws which really can be fixed with some customization work. For the price, most probably won't be disappointed with this guy in the looks department. When this Godzilla design was first revealed, more specifically the NECA, a lot of people wondered how the articulation would end up being, and surprisingly, it's pretty good. To begin, the mouth is on a hinge, opens and closes, opens and closes. I've been reading that some people have been having trouble getting the mouth to move, thinking maybe it doesn't, but it does, in fact, move on a hinge. The head is attached to the neck on a ball joint, so you have some basic movement there, as you can see. And the neck itself is on a ball joint, so you can get twists and turns, you can get Godzilla to look any way you'd like, for the most part. Looking up and down, that's about the extent of the range there. The shoulders of Godzilla are on a ball joint, so you can get some movement there. Lots of movement, full 360. The elbows are on a hinge that plugs into the arm, so you can get a swivel out of that too. So you don't get a bicep swivel, but you get a swivel at the elbow. And the hands are also on ball joints. The torso of Godzilla is attached to his body on a ball joint, so you can get some movement there, again. Unfortunately, the way that the dorsal plates are sculpted, it's very difficult to move Godzilla back to get him to rear up or something, but you can definitely get him to go down. And, of course, it being a ball joint, you can completely turn him around. you should so choose, because there are a million reasons why you would want to do that. The legs of this Godzilla are just about as you would expect. The thighs are attached to the hip on a ball joint, but interestingly enough, the ball joint is actually towards the back of the hip instead of the center, just like you would find, say, in a Monster Arts, which some of you may be used to. So the articulation makes the sculpt look a little bit weird when you put it in some awkward poses, but honestly, it allows for a lot more movement there. The knee is also on a swivel hinge combo, just like the elbow, but you're going to get a lot of movement forward, so you can make the leg go straight, but moving back, it's blocked by the sculpt. And the feet are on ball joints. Turn them around. All the way. The tail is also an interesting combination, and it's the last part of the articulation for Godzilla, because for the first 4 segments here, it's on a ball joint. And where you attach the tail out of the clamshell is attached on a ball joint. However, this portion here is bendy wire, and it stops about here. So this part, there's no wire in it at all. And the wire is somewhat difficult to move. It's very thick, or so it feels to me, and something I'm a little bit hesitant about, because in my experience with bendy wires, it's not a matter of if they're going to break, it's a matter of when. And considering I have to really force it to bend, I'm not too happy about that. But really, I'm not going to be moving his tail around wildly often. So when it comes to articulation, the NECA Godzilla is actually pretty sweet. There's a little bit of restriction to it, but really it's so that way the sculpt remains intact when he's in a neutral pose, which you can't really knock NECA for doing. So if you're looking for an articulated Godzilla 2014, this is not something you should totally ignore. So there is a question that a lot of collectors also want answered. How big is this guy? Starting off on the smaller side of things, here he is alongside some Revoltech Kaiju. A reference point here of some Ultra X. Here he is next to some of NECA's Pacific Rim stuff. Here he is between some of the larger SH Monster Arts releases. And finally, a comparison I know many wanted to see. The NECA Godzilla 2014 alongside some SH Monster Arts Godzillas. So if you have a particular display in the 6-inch scale you would like to work this Godzilla into, quite frankly, I think it can be done very easily. So, buy the NECA Godzilla now, skip it, or wait for a sale. Keeping the price point in mind, this figure is not bad at all. Some are praising this figure a bit more than it deserves, I feel, but for around, say, $20 or so, this figure's pretty stellar. Yeah, there are some paint issues, at least I see them as issues on the face, but capturing this guy under the right light makes all the difference. Seriously, take him outside when you get him. If you get him. It makes a world of difference. The articulation's pretty solid, and you can put him in quite a few interesting poses, if you're creative. Not the best it could be, but for the price, it's give and take, and we're getting a good amount here. I will stay firm on the fact bendy wire tails and figures are just a bad idea, though. Overall, if you're liking what you're seeing, I'd say pick it up. The closer to MSRP, the better. It's not necessarily something you're going to regret buying.